Here's something that doesn't get said enough. In 1828, the same year Andrew Jackson was elected president on a platform that would eventually result in one of the most brutal forced relocations in American history. The Cherokee Nation was already publishing a bilingual newspaper in their own language, in their own script, reporting on their own government, their own court decisions, their own constitutional debates. The Cherokee Phoenix ran articles in both English and Cherokee, and it was being read across the nation by people who considered the Cherokee to be uncivilized. That is not a metaphor. That is not an oversimplification. That is precisely what was happening, and the fact that most people still don't know it tells you everything about whose story got told, and whose got quietly set aside. So look, the Cherokee didn't just have a rich oral tradition, they had a written one. And that's where this story actually begins. Let's go back to a man named Sequoyah. Born sometime around 1770 in what is now Tennessee, Sequoyah was a silversmith. He was not formally educated in the Western sense. He had not studied linguistics. He spoke no English, and somewhere around 1809 he became obsessed with what he called talking leaves, the written pages that allowed Euro-American settlers to communicate across distance, to preserve knowledge, to coordinate politically. He understood with remarkable clarity that literacy was power, and he decided the Cherokee would have it. What he did next took 12 years. 12 years of developing, testing, revising, and refining a syllabary, a writing system where each symbol represents a syllable rather than a single sound. He ended up with 85 characters. And here's the thing, it was elegant, not just functional, genuinely structurally elegant. Linguists studying it later would note that it fit the Cherokee language almost perfectly, capturing the sounds and patterns of speech in a way that made it remarkably easy to learn. Within months of its introduction in 1821, Cherokee people across the nation were teaching it to each other. Within a few years, the literacy rate among the Cherokee rivaled that of their white contemporaries. That's not a minor historical detail. That is one of the most extraordinary intellectual and cultural achievements in the history of North America. And Sequoyah did it alone, with no formal training, out of a conviction that his people deserved the tools to speak for themselves, and they used it. The Cherokee Phoenix, launched in 1828 under editor Elias Boudinot, printed news, legislation, and cultural content. It argued against removal. It documented Cherokee governance. It was read and discussed and debated. This was not a people without a voice. This was a people with a printing press. Okay. But to understand what all of that literacy was actually protecting, you have to understand what kind of civilization had been built in the first place. Because the Cherokee Nation wasn't a loose collection of nomadic bands. Right. It was a settled, politically sophisticated society with thousands of years of continuity in the southern Appalachian region. The Cherokee called themselves Anivuya, the principal people, and their homeland stretched across what is now North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and beyond. They knew that land the way you know the house you grew up in. The foundation of Cherokee society was the clan system. 7 clans: Wolf, Deer, Bird, Paint, Longhair, Wild Potato, and Blue. And membership was inherited through your mother. Not your father, your mother. This was a matrilineal society, which meant that your identity, your obligations, your place in the social fabric, all of it came through the women in your family. And what that actually meant in practice was remarkable. Property passed through maternal lines. Children belonged to their mother's clan. A man who married into a family was entering her social world, not the reverse. And the clans weren't just identity markers. They were accountability structures. Every Cherokee person knew exactly what they owed to every member of their clan, and what that clan owed to them. It created a web of mutual obligation that spanned the entire nation, connecting strangers through shared lineage, shared responsibility, shared identity. And here's the part that actually reframes everything about how we typically imagine indigenous governance. The Cherokee had a system specifically designed to separate civic and military authority. Peace chiefs handled diplomacy, law, ceremony, and the everyday governance of town life. War chiefs handled conflict, military decisions, and external threats. These were distinct roles, distinct councils, distinct spheres of legitimate authority. That's not primitive. That's a sophisticated answer to one of the oldest problems in political philosophy. How do you prevent the people with the weapons from running everything? The Cherokee had worked out a structural solution to that problem centuries before it became fashionable in Western democratic theory, and women, specifically. The women known as beloved women held formal political authority in this system. Nancy Ward is probably the most documented example. Born around 1738 into the Wolf clan, she earned the title Gigao, beloved woman, after the Battle of Taliwa in 1755, where she took up her fallen husband's weapon and led Cherokee warriors. The title wasn't ceremonial. It came with a seat on the council, the right to speak on matters of war and peace, the authority to spare the lives of prisoners. She used that authority repeatedly, including to negotiate some of the earliest treaties between the Cherokee and the new American government. She advocated consistently for peace, and she was listened to formally as a matter of Cherokee constitutional structure. This was not unusual. This was how the system was designed to work, and below the level of national politics, daily life in Cherokee towns was governed by a logic that connected everything: food, ceremony, family, medicine, architecture. The three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, weren't just the Cherokee diet. They were a carefully refined agricultural system where each plant supports the others. Corn stalks give the beans something to climb. Beans fix nitrogen in the soil that feeds the corn and squash. Squash spreads wide across the ground, retaining moisture and blocking the weeds. This was ecological design, passed down, refined, and maintained across generations as both a farming practice and a statement about interdependence. You don't build a system like that without deep knowledge of biology, soil, and climate, without paying careful attention to the land over a long period of time. Cherokee medicine reflected the same depth. Practitioners worked with over 300 plant species, not as folk superstition, but as a sophisticated pharmacopoeia. The knowledge was specific. Which plant for which condition? Which part of the plant? Which season to harvest it? How to prepare it? Modern pharmacologists who've studied Cherokee botanical practices have documented that a significant portion of those remedies correspond to plants now known to contain the active compounds the Cherokee were using them for. This wasn't guesswork. This was science built from centuries of careful, systematic observation. And I cannot stress this enough. All of this existed within a ceremonial and spiritual framework that tied the community together across seasons. The green corn ceremony, or busk, was both a religious and civic event, a moment of collective renewal where debts were forgiven, conflicts were resolved, and the community recommitted to its shared values. It happened annually. It was not a festival in the tourist brochure sense. It was a functioning mechanism for social repair. Built into the cultural calendar is a structured practice for managing conflict and rebuilding cohesion. If you're still here and you're rethinking everything your history class told you about indigenous civilization, hit subscribe. We go this deep every single week. Now, 1830, the Indian Removal Act. And here's the thing, the Cherokee didn't just accept it. They fought it in court. They took the United States to the Supreme Court, twice. In Worcester v. Georgia, decided in 1832, Chief Justice John Marshall ruled in their favor. The Cherokee Nation was a distinct political community, he wrote, with territorial boundaries that Georgia had no right to violate. Andrew Jackson, the sitting president, reportedly responded with something close to, "Let Marshall enforce it." And that was it. a Supreme Court ruling in the Cherokee Nation's favor, and the executive branch simply declined to enforce it. The Trail of Tears began in earnest in 1838. Federal troops and Georgia militias moved through Cherokee territory, forcing people from their homes at gunpoint, often with no time to gather food, clothing, or belongings. They were held in stockades, overcrowded, undersupplied, disease-ridden, before being marched west to what is now Oklahoma. Historians estimate somewhere between 4,000 and 8,000 Cherokee died. Out of a population of roughly 16,000, that means something close to 1 in every 4 people was gone before the nation could rebuild. Some froze. Some starved. Many died of cholera and dysentery in the stockades before the march even began. The routes they walked, multiple paths, across different seasons, are now designated as a National Historic Trail, which, somehow, is not what the history books lead with. What makes this almost unbearable to sit with is the precision of what was dismantled. The Cherokee had a written constitution. Modeled in part on the U.S. Constitution, they had a bicameral legislature. They had courts. They had a free press. And the United States government looked at all of that, documented it, negotiated with it, and then removed it anyway. Not because the Cherokee were uncivilized, because they were in the way. And then, and this is the part that actually moves me every time, the Cherokee rebuilt. In Indian Territory, they re-established their government. They rebuilt their schools. In 1844, they relaunched their newspaper. They printed textbooks in the Cherokee syllabary. They established their own seminaries, the Cherokee male and female seminaries, that offered education comparable to the best institutions in the eastern United States. Seriously, by the 1850s, the Cherokee Nation had a higher literacy rate than the white populations of Texas and Arkansas. A nation that had just been subjected to a forced death march built a functioning civilization on unfamiliar land with stripped resources. And within a generation they had done it again. Drop a comment and tell me, which part of this genuinely surprised you most? The newspaper? The Supreme Court case Jackson ignored? The seminaries? I want to know where your particular version of the curriculum went quiet. The language is still being spoken. The syllabary Sequoyah, designed 200 years ago, is still being used. The Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians both run active language preservation programs. And thousands of people are actively learning to read and write in the script that one man designed in a silversmith's workshop because he believed his people deserved to be heard. The clans still organize community life. The green corn ceremony is still observed. The knowledge wasn't lost. It was protected, carried, and handed down through generations of people who refused to let it disappear. Here's what you were actually never taught. The Cherokee story isn't primarily a story of victimhood. It is a story of one of the most sophisticated, resilient, and politically innovative civilizations in North American history. One that built a writing system in a decade, governed itself through a constitutional framework, fought removal through the Supreme Court, got ruled in its favor, watched the ruling get ignored, survived the Trail of Tears, and then rebuilt. Again? The tragedy is real, and it has to be named. But the tragedy is not the whole story. The whole story is far bigger than that. Bigger, more complex, more remarkable, and more alive than anything you were handed in a chapter and a half. And the reason it matters that you know this, really know it, with the specific names and the specific dates and the 85 characters of a syllabary designed by one man with no formal training, is that vague respect does nothing. Sequoyah deserves to be known. Nancy Ward deserves to be known. The Cherokee Phoenix deserves to have been in your curriculum. The Worcester decision deserves to be taught alongside Marbury versus Madison. These aren't additions to American history. They are American history. They're just the part that got left out for the convenience of a narrative that needed the Cherokee to be simpler than they were. They were never simpler than they were.